Well, good morning and welcome. Thank you for being here today as we have a conversation with John McQuiston about a wonderful book that he wrote some time ago, Finding Time for the Timeless, Spirituality in the Workweek. And before we get started, just to us, I'll invite us into a time of prayer. The Lord be with you. Let us pray. Gracious God, for the gift of life, for this day, this time, this space, this moment of stillness and invitation to reflect. Thank you for our lives that are interwoven with your Spirit, and for the daily opportunities that we have to be present with you as you are present with and in us. Thank you for those throughout the world and here in this community who help us to be mindful, and particularly today for John. Thank you for his ministry of many sorts, and particularly in writing and thoughtfulness and invitation. Be with us as we engage this time. In Jesus' name, amen. So many of you have possibly seen the kind of description talking about today, but John, as an author and a member of this parish, I've had the privilege of getting to know him well, and I have the privilege of getting to call him friend. And it's a real privilege for me to share this conversation as we think about the things he invites us to do. This book, and he will, of course, talk more about it, is a collection of examples which offer refreshing stories of everyday spiritual practices that people can use to free themselves from work and worry. Think about that. That's its own accomplishment, right? Work and worry, to free ourselves from that. And so just to set the stage for that, I'll let John share more, and I'm intrigued about how the book came about. Many people who write books, they write with a purpose. They sometimes are invited to write around a particular topic, but when I saw the book some years ago, I was just excited to know that I would one day meet this person who wrote it. So here he is among us. So let us welcome John.
Have I got this on now? Yeah, all right. Well, I guess one implied in what you just said is a question about how did this book come about. And as many of you know, I wrote a book which was called Always We Begin Again, that was sort of a rewrite of Benedict's classic instructions to the monks, and I tried to rewrite that for my own use. And through a long story I won't tell you right now, it got in the hands of a friend who got it somewhere in the Morehouse. The Episcopal publishing outfit was looking for something, and so they published Always We Begin Again. Well, fast forward a few years, and I get a call from a woman named Shaw, who introduced herself as the editor of a publishing company called Jewish Lights. And they had as many publishing houses do, they had more than one imprint. So she said she had read an article in the Wall Street Journal about some salesmen who intentionally took some time out every day to pray, and she had apparently just read that article and picked up the phone and called Phyllis Tickle. Many of you know Phyllis Tickle. She lived here in Memphis, died about 15 years ago. Oh, here we go. Well, anyway, Phyllis was the editor of Publishers Weekly for religious things. And so she called Phyllis and said, I think this would be a good idea for a book. And so Phyllis said, well, call John McQuiston. And so I said, okay, I found a box in the attic with a bunch of these books, so I brought them, and they're free. They're on that table if you want any. pay no attention to whether it's a hardback or paperback. It's the same book. Anyway, it was fun to put the book together. A lot of the stories in that book are about people here in Memphis, and with the right amount of arm twisting, I could probably tell you who most of them are. Although, it's funny, things would lead. Once I started doing this, the word got around, and I got a call from somebody who was had a relative in Japan, a woman, and she said, "You should interview my relative." So we arranged to have a long-distance call, and I interviewed her. But at any rate, that's how the book started, and it was sort of fun to put together, very easy. And as you'll see, the stories are just 1 or 2 pages. No work at all, really.
So humble, right? Right, no work at all. If you have not read the book, I thought it would be a meaningful experience to have John. They're very short chapters, very, very short chapters, but there's so much meaning and intentionality in each. And John, if you would be willing to read a few, and as he mentioned, after this is over, the books are for your taking, but let us hear him offer some stories.
Well, I'll start with the very first one in the book. You hate to read when you're speaking to people, but this is only 2 pages, so bear with me. It is early on a Monday morning. Philip had been at work for 2 hours. He is the only person at his company's office. The daylight is just appearing. Philip is reading the letters, emails, and memos that came in while he was on a trip the previous week. In a few moments, his co-workers will fill the office. Philip is 60 years old. He has a wife and 2 grown children. His home is paid for. He finished educating his children a few years ago. Both went to graduate school. He is in reasonably good health, not perfect, but good. He is slightly overweight. He has a bad back and moderately high cholesterol. He attends church but does not consider himself to be religious. Philip has been on the same performance-based track his entire life. Although he has achieved financial success and considers himself lucky, he feels that he missed something of importance, that indefinable ingredient that could have turned a good life into a fulfilled life. As he sits in his corner office anticipating a busy and productive day, he is not unhappy, but he wonders what he could have done, what he might have learned, and how he should have lived in order to look back at his life this morning and say, "I am deeply satisfied." This book is for all of us who sometimes share this feeling with Philip. That was the opening, and as you can probably figure out, I see a lot of myself in Philip.
Well, one of the things that has gotten my attention about the book is how chaotic our lives are for a lot of reasons, right? We have inherited lives and systems where we are being responsible, right? We are being dutiful to family and friends and prosperity and all the things that we've been groomed as children to be successful and to be intentional and to even be first to some degree. And then when I started reading this book, I found this awareness of what does it mean to be intentionally simplistic at times, and to appreciate just the gift of the day, and to find those sort of have glimpses of goodness and joy that just comes from being still or being with others and being in community, and to know that those things can be far more sustainable than the things that we work so hard to do, because in the blink of an eye, it could all change. And so regret and the things that people continue to talk about they wish they had done, and each of us has a story of things that we wish we had done. And as we get older, and older, and talking with people as they get older, they say there are all these things that I wish I had done. Do I have enough time? And for those of us who are still not at that place of retirement, for instance, we're trying to find our way and figure it out. And the Workweek, which is a part of the book, is how do we find spirituality in the midst of the chaos of the day and all the things that are the demands. And so that's been some of what's been meaningful to me, is to help me pause and to be intentional from reading short stories that just stop me in my tracks and then help me slow down just a bit. And then I get fast again pretty quickly, but it's helpful along the way. So that's just some initial reactions that I have had from spending time with the book. But John has some other short chapters, and each are other stories that maybe you can resonate with in some way. So if you would share a few more and some other remarks just about the thinking behind the stillness piece.
Okay, well, before reading any more out of this book, just to respond a little bit to what you just said, Ollie, I really feel like that for myself and most of the people I know, we live on clock time. And the other day I was reading something, I now can't remember. A lot of stuff I read, it sticks with me, but I can't remember where I read it. I was reading about a man who was at retirement age, but he had the option of going forward for another 5 or 6 years, and turned it down and said, I'm moving. I've bought a place out in the country. I'm going out there with my dog, and we're not going to have a single house. And oh, this one's a little better. I'm not going to have a single clock in my house, and the way I'm going to keep time is by the seasons. Can you imagine living that way? It'd be such a dramatic change from the way we all live. It is funny. I imagine that hundreds of years ago, people didn't have clocks. Maybe it was 500 years ago or 1,000 years ago, but we really are, in one sense, sort of mechanized. And one of the things that was fun about capturing these books, everyone in this is all these people are contemporaries of ours, and they do live on clock time, but they really work at trying to bring some other dimension into their lives. And it's fun for me to find the stories. Well, I'll read you this one about Karen. And this Karen was a friend of a friend of a friend. She lives right outside of New York. Karen is a photographer for a large daily newspaper. She is Roman Catholic. She has 3 children. Her day begins at dawn when she lights a candle and listens to music that, according to her, keeps me in God's presence. That's a quote. She does some spiritual reading. On her commute, she prays the rosary. During the day, she tries to see God in everything and everyone. She says, the everything part is easier than the everyone part. She sees her work as a photojournalist as a calling. It is who I am, not what I do, she says. Occasionally, the newspaper wants pictures of joy or beauty, perhaps a small child on Christmas morning. More often, her task is to record incidents of pain, accident scenes, buildings destroyed by fire. Twice a year, Karen goes on a 3-day retreat. For these 3 days, she immerses herself in prayer and silence. She says, aside from attending Mass, this is the single most important practice for maintaining my spiritual life. Throughout her day, whatever it brings, she reminds herself that she is in the presence of God. She says, I want my life to be a prayer. It was fun to talk to her on the phone. She talks like you would think of somebody who wants to make her life into a prayer. It's a very quiet voice. I don't know what she looks like. This is a telephone interview.
So, John, as you take on a lot of practices, and you have just over the years, when you have these conversations with others, or as you were writing this book, what did you learn about yourself and the practices that you've taken on, and those things that you feel like you do well, and those things that are challenging, that go with some of what you've learned from others? Because you're very naturally reflective and intentional, but I'm curious to know, when you're taking these other stories, what's happening in you as you even consider it.
Well, just like the other book that I mentioned, I don't live up to these books. I like to write, and I do a lot of thinking by putting words on paper. And these stories were fun to do, and the people, almost all of them, were telephone interviews. But as far as changing my life or living up to these practices, I'm a failure at that. When Robbie was here, she would keep me going with meditation, and I want to get back to that. There's so many different kinds. I've learned that there are so many different kinds of meditation. It's not just a spiritual practice. It can just be intentionally paying attention, whether it's paying attention to the people around you, or your breath, or just stopping for a second to pay attention. And that, for me, is a talent that I would like to develop, because otherwise it's just one damn thing after another.
Let's hear another one.
Okay. This is a local person. Some of you may figure out who she is. Radha, R-A-D-A. I'm not sure how you pronounce her name. Radha is Hindu. She came to the United States from India at the age of 16 to be married to a physician. Her marriage was arranged by her parents. The Indian community in which she was raised was permeated with Hindu religion and culture, and it has always been a part of her life. She had no formal religious education, but looking back, she says her religion was simply imbued in her. Over the years, she and her husband fell deeply in love. In midlife, they were the founders of a Hindu temple in their community in the United States. How many of you have been to their Hindu temple? It's right outside of Memphis. It's the only one. So, just before the dedication of the temple, her husband died of a heart attack. Radha's friend Gloria, I'll just tell you that's Gloria Felsenthal. Radha's friend Gloria, who is Jewish, is the person who told me to interview Radha. Both speak of the other in glowing terms and are more comfortable praising the other than talking about themselves. Radha had participated in worship services at Gloria's temple at Passover, and Gloria has attended services at the Hindu temple. Since young adulthood, Radha has prayed each morning immediately after bathing. In each home in which she and her husband lived, they established an altar and a place of prayer. She feels it is important to have a sacred place in the home. Her morning routine always includes prayer and sometimes includes some spiritual reading. She also prays at the temple. She believes it adds an important dimension to pray in community. At her temple, there are services at 8 a.m. and 5 p.m. Frequently, she attends the noon service, although she says she is not primarily oriented toward ritual. She feels she expresses her religion less in terms of prayer and more by personal commitment to a way of life, a commitment to trying to do good, and she says it is more important how she acts than how many services she attends. Radha does not use a mantra. She doesn't consider herself a student of religion. She is a follower of Gandhi, who inspires her to be the change in the world so that the world can be as you want it to be. That's a quote. To be the change in the world so the world can be as you want it to be. If given a choice between taking time for prayer and doing something to help another person, Radha elects to help. She says that helping others is the highest form of worship.
Well, John, thank you for that. I'm also thinking about something we talked about some weeks ago. You talked about how we create our own realities, right? For lots of ways, and the senses that we have, and I'd like for you to sort of talk more about the five senses, and then you said, and then we add other things to the five senses that creates a reality, and I found that very interesting as a concept of we're in our own space, we're in our own kind of worlds, right? And it's our world, it's my thoughts. I've created my own reality, and each of us has created their own reality. But I would be interested, because some of that's connected to time and what time does to how we go about our days, and what's the reality with which we're navigating life. And you talked some about that, but that seemed very appropriate in thinking about this particular book of timeless things. So.
Well, to respond to that, I start out as I think through this. We have the five senses, and so we have the input from each one of the five senses. And when I say we have the input, there is, I believe, way back down there in the bottom of every one of us is the watcher, the perceiver, the thing about each one of us that experiences whatever it is that our five senses are bringing to us. And then we also have our thoughts and our feelings. And so you take the five senses and your thoughts and your feelings, your emotions, and there is, I believe, in each one of us an essence that, I guess the traditional word for that would be a soul, that experiences all that, experiences our thoughts, our emotions, pain, if we stick a pain in, a pin in our leg, our smells, our touches, what we see. But I also believe that it's so easy for me to spend my life just having that flow of inputs from the senses and thoughts that I pick up from other people, from television, from the media. And unless I really work on it, I don't have any control over any of that. But I think that as I look back years later after collecting these stories, I think about the common theme of all these stories is that these were people who somehow found a way to take, maybe it was just a small degree of control over, I mean, we say over their time, but I'm talking about over their thoughts, over their feelings. And so another way to put this, if you want to talk about all the work that's being done the last 20 years about consciousness, I mean, nothing comes to any of us except through consciousness. consciousness, I'm using that word in a broad sense to include all five senses, everything we think, everything we feel. We all get that through our awareness and our consciousness. But we have two ways to do that. One is just to have it dump on us, and the other is to maybe take a little time to take control of it. And that latter I find is hard, but I really do believe it's possible. And I think that one of the reasons that people who spend hours in meditation or prayer, they may not be thinking that that's the objective, but I think the effect of spending those hours like that is to take control. And I know that when I will sit myself down and say, okay, just sit here and let it be, 15, 20 minutes of that changes the rest of the day. One fellow, years ago, I was in a class at Rhodes College that was taught by a philosophy professor, and he was talking about meditation, and he said, "Now you should do this every day. You'll really change your whole way of being." And he said, "But if you don't have time to do that 20 minutes a day, then do it for an hour."
Well, and also I'm mindful of Scripture and the things that, Paul writes about thinking on things, and there was a handout that John and I provided that you have a copy of, but will you sort of, as we look at that passage and how that's connected to creating the space in the day to be intentional. I know he said 20 minutes or maybe take an hour, right? So, yeah.
Well, I was really struck by this passage because he talks here and elsewhere about taking control, and the way that Paul suggests we take control is to have the mind of Christ. And he says that in several places, and then in the verse 8 down here of this handout in Philippians, he talks about, which to me is a little bit easier than having the mind of Christ, maybe more achievable. Whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, anything is excellent, or if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about these things. And I spend a lot of my time thinking of things that are not lovely or praiseworthy or admirable. I spend a lot of time worrying. I'm a lifelong worrier. I think if I could put these words of Paul's into practice, I would have an entirely different and better life. So that's the sermon, this handout. That's Ollie's sermon, not mine.
Well, let's hear one more story, and then I'm mindful that a part of what John's suggesting from his book is worthy of a conversation among us that are here gathered, some time for questions and answers, and then some time to talk amongst ourselves, as it were. But if you'll read one more, and then we'll have some time to just discuss some more.
All right. I use Rebecca here. She may be a little bit closer to some of us. here in this room. Rebecca is in her late 40s. She was born and still is an Episcopalian. She lives on the East Coast, and she fits the stereotype of her religion. She comes from an upper middle-class family, attended good schools, is married to a successful businessman. She has one child at home, a son aged 17, another son who is a sophomore in college. Sometime in her 30s, she had a friend who suggested she read a little quarterly publication available at her church called Forward Day by Day. It contains daily Bible readings and short commentary on each of the readings. The authors who write the commentaries are anonymous. Rebecca began doing her spiritual reading each morning after the house emptied. She says that after she started the practice of reading the daily Bible citations and the commentary, she began reading the Episcopal service of morning prayer. But after some time, she gave up the practice of regularly reading the service, although she still goes back to it from time to time. She says that she found that the service had too many words. Even though they were words that she loved and had heard many times, she felt that they were getting in her way. She says she loves her church, but most mornings she just doesn't do anything except sit. She sits with her hands folded in her lap. When she does that, is she praying? Well, Ollie, if you don't mind, I would suggest that you turn your chairs so that you're with a group of 4, 5 people. Bigger than that, it's hard to talk. Smaller than that, it'd just be 1 or 2 of you. And maybe share with each other what, if anything, you find helpful in bringing a more meaningful dimension to your lives. Is that okay? All right.
Hello, friends. I'm mindful that it's 10:15 and just want to make you aware. Of course, continue to have your conversations, but to be mindful if anybody has to escape to go and prepare for worship. So thanks for being here, and let us give a round of applause to John McQuiston.